I want to talk about a letter that was submitted to the Circuit Court of Appeals on Monday under the name of John Sauer. And it is a batshit letter. Right and left do not agree on much, but we all agree that this is a batshit letter coming from the Solicitor General of the United States. I'll describe just a paragraph of it for now. Third paragraph. There is no substitute for the tariffs and deals that President Trump has made. 1 year ago, the United States was a dead country, and now, because of the trillions of dollars being paid by countries that have so badly abused us, America is a strong, financially viable, and respected country again. If the United States were forced to pay back the trillions of dollars committed to us, America could go from strength to failure the moment such an incorrect decision took effect. So it's about tariffs.
So the Yale Budget Lab ran the numbers and found that the average effective tariff rate is now about 18%. That's the highest it's been since 1933. What does that mean for the U.S. economy overall?
This doubling of tariffs, basically doubling from what we saw in June, the effective tariff rate, that is not only going to add to another increase in prices, which we're only beginning to see the early signs of right now, but also the tariffs are so large that they also squeeze profit margins, and that means cost cutting or layoffs.
So let me take a step back and talk about why the case involved is our best chance for reining in Donald Trump, and why this batshit letter may actually defeat any hope that we have that the Supreme Court will rein in Donald Trump.
This is an emergency. This is a tragic emergency.
I've been covering this case. It's called VOS Selections. The lead plaintiff is a wine importer. So, of course, they have to import wine from places like France and Italy and some other more interesting countries. And so as a result, they're right at the crux of these tariffs that Trump has imposed.
There are about 236,000 small business importers in the U.S. Now, those are companies that have less than 500 employees, and they say that they're looking at about $200 billion a year.
And they are represented by somebody associated with the Cato Institute.
Well, when you have those kind of enemies, you know you're doing the right thing.
So they sued, and then a bunch of Democratic states sued about the same tariffs. Democratic states obviously represented by Democrats, but this side of the docket is represented by Cato, and a ton of institutional leading lights of right-wing legal thought have joined in, and also NGOs. So, for example, in addition to Cato, the American Enterprise Institute has weighed in, and the Chamber of Commerce. So this is an area at a time when the country, left and right, don't agree on anything. Left and right do agree.
With regard to taxes, the Constitution was very clear. Presidents can't raise taxes. How can a president possibly unilaterally by himself raise taxes? And so I look at it as a constitutional issue. I think, how can tariffs be anything but a tax?
The Chamber of Commerce is on the same side as a bunch of Democratic states. And that means when this gets to SCOTUS, and it will get to SCOTUS, SCOTUS is going to view it differently than it views all the other challenges to Trump's power. And that's for two reasons. One is because it has to do with the economy, right? SCOTUS has already said, and I'll get back to this in a second, but they've already said Donald Trump can fire anybody he wants except for Jerome Powell. We will do backflips to invent some reason why he can't fire Jerome Powell, but he can fire everyone else. That's an indication that however much else the Supreme Court wants to help Trump, they want to protect the economy. And the other reason, sort of I've already said it, is they're not going to be listening to Norm Eisen or the ACLU. They're going to be listening to lawyers that are their friends. And so this presents a real opportunity. The Supreme Court will say, fuck you, Trump, you can't do this. And this is, of course, a clear separation of powers issue because it goes to taxation.
How could one person raise taxes without the authority of Congress?
Congress gets to tax. Donald Trump, as he's done on so many things, declared an emergency and said, I have to impose tariffs to deal with this emergency.
A tragic emergency.
Whether or not a real emergency is there. The legal questions have to do with whether he can use something called IEPA to do that.
The IEPA, International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Whether courts can review his claims, like when Donald Trump says, oh, these trade deficits with other countries create an emergency, or, oh, Brazil is going to prosecute my buddy Jair Bolsonaro.
New tariffs imposed on coffee from Brazil have been announced by President Trump.
I do believe that the U.S. does need to manufacture more goods. However, coffee is not one of those things.
The 50% hike hits an industry already struggling with prices rising because of weather-related shortages. The US actually has a trade surplus with South America's biggest economy. It exports more than it buys.
Whether courts can say, does Trump have the competency to say that prosecution of a coup attempt is a threat to the United States rather than just him?
Brazilian President Lula da Silva says if America won't buy his goods, then he'll find someone who will, suggesting America is going to struggle more with Trump's tariffs than his intended target.
Then, thirdly, if they can review it, are there facts to substantiate that this is an emergency? That's the case before him. But this case is going to come to the Supreme Court on the backbone of some decisions that the Supreme Court has already made. And I argue that John Sauer, who, of course, won Trump v. U.S. and got Trump immunity.
If the president decides that his rival is a corrupt person, and he orders the military or orders someone to assassinate him, is that within his official acts that for which he can get immunity?
In retrospect, as soon as they held that hearing for Trump v. U.S., it was clear this was not about the law. It was about what right-wing Supreme Court justices believe based on Fox News. So the way in which John Sauer won that case, I argue, is not the law, because it was ridiculous. I mean, he was literally arguing that Trump could kill one of his adversaries with SEAL Team 6.
It would depend on the hypothetical, but we can see that could well be an official act.
This is a case where Trump nearly got Mike Pence killed if he declared it an emergency. Sauer won that case by him and Trump and everyone else creating a media environment such that the Fox News bubble that right-wing justices have pickled in for decades,
if I may, seriously?
would lead them to believe that Trump was unfairly being prosecuted and they needed to intervene to prevent meanie Democrats from taking it out on Trump.
The department moved to dismiss a corruption case against the mayor of New York. The acting Southern District of New York U.S. attorney refused to undertake an action that she believed was deeply unethical. So it fell on her number two, Hagan Scotton. This is what he said. Any assistant U.S. attorney would know our laws and traditions do not allow using the prosecutorial power to influence other citizens, much less elected officials, in this way. If no lawyer within earshot of the president is willing to give him that advice, then I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, but it was never going to be me. My question to you, Mr. Sauer, is, would that be you?
Would
that be you if it fell to you to dismiss that case? Would you be the coward or fool willing to dismiss that case on behalf of the president?
I certainly can't speak to any official action that I might or might not take in a hypothetical scenario. I will say that there was a distressing lack of letters like this during the weaponization of justice.
In other words, I'm saying John Sauer is not particularly a great legal lawyer. He's great at creating a media environment in which the Supreme Court justices are pickled and therefore succeeding in convincing them on politics, not the law. And as soon as he was confirmed as Solicitor General, DOJ started having more successes with the Supreme Court. You may recall that the Supreme Court issued a couple of rulings that were at least minor setbacks for Trump. Stephen Miller tried to use the Alien Enemies Act to be able to deport a bunch of Venezuelan guys because they had tattoos. He was hoping, again, using an emergency, a false emergency, he was hoping to be able to evade all due process for deportations. And when Supreme Court heard that case, they said, the way in which Judge Boasberg decided it is wrong. You can't do class action. You can't do this entire category of people. But we do affirm that everyone that you want to deport under AEA can have access to the courts. And then over Easter weekend, Trump was busy deporting people. And literally, a bunch of Catholic justices took time out from their Easter weekend and said, Trump, bring those buses back. And he did. And then also in the Kilmar Abrego case, they said that DOJ had to at least explain to the judge in that case how they were trying to get Kilmar Abrego back. So those were some setbacks. And what happened after Sauer came in is, first of all, DOJ succeeded in getting SCOTUS to rubber stamp basically the firing of everybody except for Jerome Powell.
So,
in a couple of cases, one is called Wilcox. They basically said, you can go ahead and fire everyone, even if Congress says you can't fire these people. And, in 3 years after we do the legal review, maybe you'll be wrong. So in other words, the most important holding from Wilcox, which is now being applied elsewhere, is not that Trump can fire everyone, although that's a problem. It's that Trump can fire everyone and avoid a stay. So in other words, even if there's a good argument that he can't fire people, Supreme Court gave him the green light to just fire everyone, and if he's breaking the law, we'll come back in 3 years and clean everything up. And that precedent, Wilcox, now is being applied to other instances. There's a case called DVD where a judge said, you can't deport these guys to South Sudan. They have no tie to it. There's a civil war going on. And Trump serially got the Supreme Court to say, not only does it matter if they're in contempt of that judge's order, but same thing has happened with Wilcox. We don't have to wait to find out whether this is legal or not. We can deport them to South Sudan, and by the time they get their day in court, they'll be dead, but fuck it. I mean, that's basically what the Supreme Court bought off on. So we're at a position now where the big area, the big win that Trump has gotten in the Supreme Court is that SCOTUS is not waiting. SCOTUS is saying Trump can go ahead and break the law, and then if we later find out that he was breaking the law, then we're going to have to unwind the decisions of the law breaking. And of course, given that he's trying to be a fascist, you see the problem.
A tragic emergency.
So back to my wine importer.
Well, in terms of the customs and duty, we were paying a few bucks a case. Now we're looking more like $15 to $20 a case. And so if you're looking at a container with 1,000 cases, do the math. You're at about $20,000 plus just on a container, which you have to pay up front.
We're at the second review level, right? So first is in something called the Court of International Trade. None of us knew what it was. A 3-judge panel. Back at the end of May, they said, the wine guy, he's right. You can't use IEEPA to impose tariffs on him.
Importers, we're kind of the canaries in the coal mine.
There was the hearing, and then they hadn't yet issued the opinion yet. And the hearing was important because one of the arguments that the court agreed with was Trump couldn't use tariffs to strong-arm people, basically. But in the period between the hearing and the opinion that ruled against him, Trump submitted a bunch of declarations from like Marco Rubio and Scott Bessent and so on, saying, if you rule against us, you have to give us a stay because Trump is using the threat of these tariffs to strong-arm the rest of the world. So in other words, this was an argument that, first of all, it was a new argument, and frankly, in contradiction to the arguments before the court. It was presented in a period where nothing active was going on. So the plaintiffs didn't really have a chance to say, you know what, your cabinet members are full of shit. Let me bring Marco Rubio in to say what he's saying under oath so I can contest that. So it was this black hole. They used this black hole to put a bunch of new facts in, which is that they had to strong-arm these other countries. And in the process, they said, don't worry about the stay. If we lose, we'll pay everything back. Now, that's a problem already because they'll pay the wine importer back and everyone else who imports and has to pay the tariffs, but they're not going to pay American consumers. The American consumers who are paying $50 for their bottle of French Sauvignon Blanc, they're not going to get the $10 that they've paid in tariff back, right? So it's a problematic argument already. But they did say we're going to pay them back. So here we are, a couple weeks ago, this was on July 31st, the Circuit Court of Appeals heard this case. And because they wanted to get this through quickly, they gave Trump the stay. They said, okay, you go strong arm everyone. They gave Trump the stay. And in the meantime, when he was strong-arming people, he got no real trade deals. He announced the EU trade deal on July 27th. They're still fighting over what they actually agreed to. It was a nice photo op and a golf course, but it's, in my opinion, it's just a holding pattern. But Trump, I've gotten an agreement with the EU, biggest market in the world, blah, blah, blah. So they have the hearing on the 31st. The entire panel reviews. And I think that it could come out either way. But a lot of people came out saying, oh, my God, Trump got his ass handed to him. In the interim, Trump has started doing what Trump does, which is tweet wildly. He started on July 31st, the same day as the hearing. Tariffs are making America great and rich again. So remember, he didn't get deals with 90 countries. He basically just unilaterally imposed huge tariffs on countries on August 1st. Unilaterally said, okay, you get 30, you get 15, you get 20, you get 40. Just nuts. So then on August 6th, he's like, reciprocal tariffs take effect. And then he said, the only thing that can stop America's greatness would be a radical left court that wants to see our country fail. By the way, the circuit court has a bunch of Republicans on it. No Trump appointees, but it is a bunch of like old Bush appointees. So starting on August 6th, Trump starts blaming the courts. On August 8th, he bullshit. Tariffs having a great effect on the stock market, hundreds and billions of dollars pouring in. We're getting rich, success, and greatness, not turmoil. And he says if these tariffs get turned over, we're going to have a 1929 style disaster. We're going to have Great Depression if these tariffs get turned over. And then last night, so after the letter that we're going to come back to in a second, last night he said he yelled at Goldman Sachs, which said American consumers are paying basically 20% of the tariffs. And he threatened Goldman Sachs. He said, you fire the guy who says that consumers are paying these tariffs. And then he repeated, consumers aren't paying the tariffs. If this is overturned, then we're going to have a market crash. So tweet, 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 tweet. Those tweets are actually what makes up the letter. So if you look back at the letter, and I did a post on this, if you look at the letter, all but one line in the Batshit letter is Trump's tweets. And the main line that is not is a line that says there is no substitute for the tariffs and deals that President Trump has made. There is a bullshit claim that this is new authority based on the EU tariffs. That's bullshit. Basically, what John Sauer is doing with this letter is saying Trump's tweets are a new legal authority. Trump's tweets are a new legal authority. Anyway, that line, there's no substitute for tariffs and deals that President Trump has made. The plaintiffs, the wine importer, says, dude, go to Congress. That's the substitute. Do what you're supposed to do constitutionally.
The president is asserting authority under an act, the IEPA, International Emergency Economic Powers Act, but it doesn't authorize the president to issue tariffs.
So that's where the batshit letter comes from. Everyone has been laughing at this batshit letter. It is batshit. By the way, it's not even on DOJ letterhead. But Scott Bassett last night on Kudlow gave up the game. He explained what's going on because this letter served to say, if you rule against us, give us a stay, right? So this is the same function that DOJ did below in this gray zone, in this black hole period. They make a new argument and they say, based on this new argument, you have to give us a stay. Down below it was, we need to strong arm other countries. This time it's like, we're getting rich off tariffs. You can't overturn our tariffs. Well, so yesterday on Kudlow, Bassett said, Larry, good framing here. Kudlow says,
if the tariff court wins on appeal, you got other ways to put this trade and tariff policy together.
Exactly the question that one bullshit line in the John Sauer letter addresses, whether or not there are other ways to do it. There are other ways to do it. Go to Congress. And Bassett says, Larry.
Good framing here would be if the tariff court rules against us, it will immediately be enjoined. So the tariffs will likely continue. Then it will go to the Supreme Court in October. Then we would expect a ruling in January. But I tell you, Larry, the amount of money that's coming in here, I think the more deals we've done, the more money coming in, it gets harder and harder for SCOTUS to rule against us.
So what Donald Trump is doing, and this is very apparent, and it builds off those precedents about whether Trump has to wait to fire people. What Trump is doing is saying, if we start raising money.
How much you got cooking on that, the amount of money? Ballpark. Both private direct investment and these government investments.
Well, just on the tariff income, I've been saying $300 billion, but I think we're going to have to substantially revise that up. So well in excess, 1% of GDP. And then with the new investments, they're the sovereign investments that we talked about. But then in terms of the committed investment by private industry, we're well over 10 trillion.
Then the Supreme Court, in the one case where left and right absolutely agree, if we start raising money hand over fist,
I love 10 trillion.
Then the Supreme Court is never going to overturn this.
It's an unbelievable number.
And that is the plan.
Unbelievable story.
And that is why even this batshit letter may succeed in defeating our best chance of reining in Trump with the Supreme Court.